All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Word is Bond broadcast hosted by the Bond Educational Group. Every Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time, we interview people in education and business about how equity shows up in their own industry. I am Stephanie Bradley. I am the project lead for the Equity Summit for the Bond Educational Group and the moderator and kind of co-host for today's session. So before I introduce our wonderful guest, I want to remind everyone watching that our Equity Summit is quickly approaching February 8th through 10th, 2022. The event will still be 100% virtual. So go online and purchase your tickets at theequitysummit.com. Our theme this year is Rising Together, and we're even more excited about our speaker lineup for this year. So for more information, again, go to www.theequitysummit.com. So today I have my good friend Stephen here. Every other week, we've kind of interviewed people that are in business or education that are leaders in their industry and that are doing like huge things to advance equity in their own spaces. And little do people know that the behind the scenes of the Equity Summit and some things with the Bond Educational Group are by people that you may not necessarily see as the face of diversity anywhere, myself included, Stephen included. We are just simply people that have a passion for equity. And we do this work and we do it well, might I add, because we are just simply passionate about making sure that everyone has access to an equitable space. So Stephen and I are on the planning committee for the Equity Summit, along with a few other folks. And I wanted you all to see who was behind all the great work that's going on with the summit. So Stephen, you want to tell us maybe a little bit about yourself, who you are, and why you have a passion for equity?
Sure. My name's Stephen Cordelli Roberts, he, him, his. I'm originally from Long Island, New York, and I currently live in Tampa, Florida. And my background is in higher education and learning and development. And my passion for equity probably stems from my background in education. I was thinking back to what were some of my aha moments for what fueled my passion for equity. And I think back to a really clear example when I was student teaching, and the high school I was student teaching at. I knew it was a new high school in this town, so I was really excited. It had all the smart boards in the classrooms. It was a brand new building. But what I quickly came to learn in my first week there was that though the school itself was new, many of the students that were attending couldn't even afford the school supplies, and
Mhm.
they would leave their notebooks there because they didn't want to take them home and risk losing them and things of that nature.
Wow.
And that um, dichotomy there really stuck with me, that all that money was spent, all the taxpayer money was spent to build that school, but really wasn't getting to the root cause of the issues. And I think that's where inequities come into play, the systemic nature that oftentimes in society we put band-aids on things, and a new school isn't going to get to the heart of the issues to really impact and improve the lives of those students.
Wow. Oh, that's such an impactful story. And around what age was that for you? Or like around time frame for you?
How old I was?
Yeah.
So I was, when I student taught, that was my senior year of college at that point.
Okay. Okay.
So, I mean, at that point, I already knew about inequities, but that was kind of, for me, a more tangible, real life example at work.
Yeah. So was that kind of like the start of I want to go into this work more formally, or I just want to make sure it's like embedded into everything that I do? How was that influence for you?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I knew that I was actually going to be proceeding into higher education.
Mm.
Um, but I took from those experiences and working in the secondary education realm that in the work I wanted to do, it was important that students' identities are seen and valued on the campuses I was working at, and making sure that there's resources for students so that they feel like they belong on those campuses.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And Stephen and I talked a little bit before this, everyone, and we were like, let's make this a conversation. So I'm gonna kind of like turn it on myself too, is like my passion for equity, very much like Stephen. You have these like situations that you run into when you're as you're growing up or as you're in school that like that just doesn't sit right with me. So I always talk a lot about the circumstances and things that my husband, then boyfriend, has gone through, being a Black man and now a Black man in law enforcement. It's an interesting dynamic for him. And as I watch him walk through that, and sometimes I tell him, you know, you really need to talk to people about this so that they either don't have this perception of law enforcement, or they can see, like young Black males especially, they can see what their career opportunities are and think of law enforcement as something that doesn't have to be this this very like rigid, and of course not a fan of the community, you know, kind of role. And his response to me is like, I'm tired, you know, I'm tired of having to explain to people, I'm tired of having to you know, be the voice. And I think that that's where we as allies come in, and we really have to be the voice for the voiceless, or for those that are just tired of being the voice themselves. So I love the concept of allyship. I believe Stephen and I are truly that, allies for those around us that maybe don't look like us, or even do look like us, and don't have the ability to speak up for themselves. So, and sometimes they do, and they have that voice, but using ours as allies really aids in a multitude of efforts. So yeah, thanks for that, Stephen. Okay, perfect. So next question is, what does equity mean to you?
Yeah, equity means to me that we are getting to the root causes systemically and leveling the playing field at those root causes. And I think as I've grown older, I see how so much of the laws and the systems we've in place perpetuate these inequities. And I think if people weren't aware this past year and a half during
Mm,
COVID-19, the racial and economic pandemics has laid bare what the inequities are in our system and how they are continuing to be perpetuated if we don't address those root causes. And so making sure that, you know, there's so many people right now that have lost their jobs due to COVID. And, you know, we saw at the start of COVID, lines on TV for food banks were piling up. But donating food is great to those food banks, but is that addressing the root cause of why the people that lost their jobs did, or what else we can do to impact them and help them get support? So I think continuing to see those, the shifts have been something that's been really important for me. And then, you know, equity also means to me that we're looking at it not just through the lens of one identity that someone holds either. And I think oftentimes things are broken down into just one category, and we need to identify how people are impacted by the intersectionality of the identities they hold. So, you know, if someone is not just male, but if like me, they are a gay white male, what does that mean? So holding, while I hold privileged identities, some of those, and some of them, they are also marginalized. And so that intersection there of that.
yes. And I'm glad you mentioned that. There's so much to unpack there in what you said. And I think about how you are, just by looking at you, white male, but these all these complexities that live within us. And even with myself, being both my parents were born and raised in the Philippines, and I'm first generation American citizen. Um, but you know, I fall into this minority category that is arguably the model minority myth, as they call it. So I talked about this a little bit in my last interview, but I also think about how even though it's seen as Asian people assimilate with white people, I was raised in a predominantly Black area. So most of my friends, my husband, my children, they're all Black. So I do not experience that model minority myth because of the people I hang around, or maybe how I'm perceived, or who I naturally gravitate to. That doesn't happen for me. So I think about those situations as well, because we're not victims of our environment, but we're products of that in many cases. And we have to always be accepting of the complexities that live within other people. And I think I love that you put he, him, his. Pronouns are huge now. I think we're targeting and talking about businesses and recognizing other people's differences. I often question myself, like, what's the point of pronouns when I obviously, I'm a married woman, so you would know that I would go by her or she. But I learned recently, actually, that it's because you want to make it more comfortable for those that may identify as something that they're not seen as, that they can be outright about who they identify as and be more comfortable with that. So I appreciate that designation by your name. I need to do better and do that on like all my work Zoom calls moving forward too. And I love your explanation about equity in terms of recent events and things that are going on. We see it a lot, and we see it. I think we saw it recently, even with the Olympics. I think about how I believe her name is Sha'Carri. Her last name is Robertson or Robinson. I can't remember which one it was, but of course, I think most people know here that she was banned because of the marijuana use. And I think about, yes, obviously, rules were broken and those things happen and consequences should happen because of that. But then I think of the systemic issue with it, where it's like, marijuana is not something, potentially, depending on who you talk to, not something that's seen as like a hard drug or something that is used as like a steroid by any means for athletes. So let's go back to the system and to the rules and the regulations. I just use that as a parallel, not to state an opinion by any means, but as a parallel of what is going on systemically. And if we go all the way back to, especially in terms of education, like redlining, things like that, that all plays into where we're at today. So the work that you and I do is impactful because of that. Yes, wonderful. Absolutely. Okay. And I talked a little bit about recent events, but is there another one, maybe more specifically, that you can think of, or anything that really inspires you in terms of equity that you want to voice or talk about?
Yeah, I think for me, what's been at the top of my mind lately in terms of recent events and equity is what's going on in Afghanistan. And I think, people can agree or disagree with whether or not the US should have withdrawn from it. But I think where we are in the withdrawal process and seeing how not just for Americans, but Afghanis themselves, and especially those that assisted the US, how the US right now is prioritizing Americans before August 31st to complete the withdrawal. And what does that mean for those that, stood alongside our armed forces, translating or, whatever else they did on the ground there, working with NGOs, and are now at fear with the Taliban taking control. And I think though it's a global event, it's very much still playing out then here at home. Then the inequities are perpetuated. We have then, tens of thousands of refugees coming to the country that we now need to house, and we're bringing them into a system that, especially in the past, recent decade, with the heightened rhetoric that's anti-immigrants, what does that mean? And how can they're leaving a place where they don't feel safe, and now how can we make them feel safe and included here, wherever they may be calling their new home. So I think that's probably been at the top of my mind for the inequities there. And I think there's been a lot of pushback on the news about the withdrawal itself, and about the Americans being evacuated, but oftentimes not thinking about the true consequences of those that helped us out along the way and what that means for who we are and what we stand for.
Yeah, I love that. And it certainly speaks to what our country has gone through over decades in terms of immigration itself. Me coming from immigrant parents and some family members that have come here not under the best circumstances. I always turn it to the bigger question is how would you want to be treated? And it's so cliche, and it's something that we say all the time, and we learned probably when we were in kindergarten, treat others how you want to be treated, but the sentiment is still very much the same. And that goes back to why we are in this work of equity. So I love that recent example. Your passion for equity is really strong, Stephen. So I enjoy like all the work that we do together for sure. Any other things that you want to share, or let's talk a little bit actually about your work with the Equity Summit, and what you do and what you did last year. Oh my gosh, I think we could have a whole nother session about how Stephen just crushes everything. If you all weren't able to participate in the Equity Summit last year, it's hosted through a virtual platform, and there is a lot of logistics and things that go on behind the scenes. So you probably got emails from Stephen. He did a lot of coordinating with speakers, moderators, things on the back end. But you want to talk maybe a little bit about your role and what you do for the Equity Summit?
Sure. My role is really with registration mainly, and helping with our system that we use with Whova. So if you received emails or you write emails to the main email address, my name is on there, but now you have a face to the name as well. And so that was my role last year, making sure we were ready to go, and making sure that the speakers had all the information they need. And if you were attending, that you had all the information you needed, and keeping all of that coordinated and making sure we were on track in that way. So if you haven't gotten your ticket, make sure you do. Our tickets are live. As Stephanie noted at the front end, we'll have the 2 tracks, the education and the business. So you can either buy individual tickets if you want to just go to one of those tracks. If you want to see sessions from both of those tracks, you can do that. And the ticket price for both tracks is a little bit higher, but for all tracks, you will have access to the recordings for the track that you choose, whether it's one or both, for 6 months after the sessions conclude. So we'll be in February. So at the end of August in 2022, that's already a year from now. So definitely get your ticket price now, and definitely tell your friends and colleagues to get their tickets as well.
Yes, love that. Yeah, Stephen explained that perfectly. I would say last year we had a ton of different tracks, and I think we had even some things related to sports, things of that nature. We really hyper focused on business and education this year, given all of especially the significant increase in businesses hiring these diversity roles. We know that it's a huge network of people that need this information. The whole point of the Equity Summit is to get people in one room to talk about action. How can you make your workspaces more equitable? How can you make your classrooms or higher ed institutions more equitable? We want to see more underserved communities in the top places, in businesses and in education. We want to see them pursue PhDs and master's degrees and to go to college. And in the business world, we want to see them as the CEOs and CMOs and the CFOs of the world. So that is the whole purpose of why we do what we do. So I think we're closing out, but Stephen, I think that the takeaway here is you don't have to have a doctorate degree, although we admire that. You don't have to be the chief diversity officer, although we admire that. You simply have to have a passion for equity to do the work. And that is who is behind the Equity Summit itself. So Stephen, thank you for your time. I know that you're very busy today, and I'm sure we talk 1,000 times a week. So I'm sure I'll be talking to you again soon.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for closing us out with the ticket information, theequitysummit.com. Thank you for tuning in, and you can purchase tickets today. Thanks, everyone. Bye, Stephen.